My name is Donica Pottie. I'm from a small province on the eastern seaboard of Canada called Nova Scotia. My parents live in a small town called Bridgewater in Nova Scotia. I joined the Foreign Service of Canada in 1991. I've served abroad in China, Jordan, and Cambodia. I'm very happy to now be serving in Thailand. I've spent a lot of my career working on issues related to human rights, human security, and peacekeeping. Within that, the basket of issues, I have a specific focus on the rights of women and girls, and also on LGBTQ issues. I grew up when adult women were really fighting for their rights and fighting to have equal access to educational and job opportunities, when it was clear that women were paid less even if they were doing the same job as a man. I'm afraid that's still true in Canada even today. And as a young woman, of course, I felt strongly that women were equal, and so that started my interest in women's rights. As a young woman, I was trying to find my way and trying to, and just, had become aware that women tended to have fewer opportunities, and I didn't want that for myself. At the age of 11 or 12, I told my parents I was a feminist, and at the age of 12, I told my father, who was then in charge of my junior high school, that if I had to take women's courses like sewing or cooking, that I was going to report him to the Human Rights Commission and launch a challenge, because men and women, in my view then, should have the right to choose whether they wanted to do stuff with carpentry or wood, or whether they wanted to learn to cook. When I was 10 or 11, I began to keep a scrapbook of magazine articles and newspaper articles where women, young women or older women, had achieved something. This was in the 1970s, and women were making some breakthroughs in areas that had been wholly off limits to the previous generation of young women. And it was my way of trying to reassure myself that if you had tenacity and a bit of courage and would stand up for yourself, that as a woman I could be successful. For LGBTQ issues, it started in early adulthood when I realized that I had high school friends who were gay but had felt they had to hide it. So they hadn't been able to do the things that I took for granted, like openly date. And then 2.5 years ago, my daughter, who was then 14, came out as gay. And then I had to think through how to parent a gay child in a world where gay people are still not equal, where they do face barriers and challenges. You can, I think, bring your personal story into your work, and that provides a new perspective or a different perspective that you can bring to the table when you're talking through these issues, and it also makes the work much more meaningful at a personal level. My first assignment was in the Human Rights Division, and until I think you understand international human rights obligations and what that means, you have many fewer tools to be speaking about and advocating for human rights. So it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, understanding international human rights treaties, learning a bit about them, and then thinking through how governments are supposed to hold each other to account for their human rights obligations. And so I've spent a lot of my career working in or around those areas. I want to listen, and if there's something that they ask me to do that I can or that my embassy can do, we want to do that. Sometimes that includes providing financial assistance for events or programming that they have. But we have to be very careful about giving advice to civil society groups in other countries, because they understand the local context better. So I see our job as embassies, my embassy's job, to support them rather than advise or tell them what to do. Or maybe sometimes I may have examples of what's happened in other countries that may have worked that I can raise as something they might want to think about. When the Prime Minister was elected, our current Prime Minister was elected in 2015. In November 2015, he announced his cabinet, and he announced 50% women and 50% men in cabinet. And when asked the question why, he said, well, because it's 2015. I had thought that I would never see that in my lifetime, that we would have a cabinet that's half women and half men. I was surprised by how moved I was and how happy I was to see equal numbers of women and men at the cabinet table. He is a feminist. He has said this outright, and he has called on men to stand up and be feminists as well. In his view, and I share his view, feminism, it means that you believe that men and women are equal. That also means that men should have more choice as well, that men shouldn't have to forego the joys of hands-on parenting, of being as present in their children's lives as they want to be, even if that means taking time off work to be home with the kids. In my first couple of weeks here, I went to a meeting of the Salzburg Global Forum in Chiang Rai, and the Salzburg Forum brought together people of many different age groups, but with a focus on young LGBT activists from the world over. We were able to support a Thai, Cambodian, and Lao LGBT activists to attend, as well as to bring in a Canadian permanent resident who was originally from Syria. Following the Salzburg Forum, we had a large gathering here where we brought together a large group of mainly young Thai LGBTQIA people in one room to have a discussion about what my embassy and other embassies can be doing and should be doing to support the work of those groups. There's a sense, I think, that the international community spends a lot of time on the LGBT group and spends much less attention on transgender and intersex. And I think from that conversation, that's something where perhaps in my time here I'd like to figure out ways that we can help the transgender and intersex group work with them and try to support them as they seek equal rights and equal opportunities.